All right, we are back here on the podcast, getting ready to talk Mets baseball. They are currently the owners of the best record in the National League at time of recording. Joining me today, he covers the Mets for Mets NSI, and technically he's my boss on Mets NSI. Pat Ragazzo is here. Pat, how are you?
I'm great, Mike. How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on here. I gotta say, keep an eye on the Mets for a while here. I talk about the top of my pod as well. Considering the fact that this team has had two high paid free agent starting pitchers not throw a pitch. Juan Soto could get off to a pretty slow start, losing both lefty specialists for the season to injury here. A lot of things not going right in the bottom of the lineup, and they're still the best record in the National League. I feel like it's a pretty crazy season for the Mets to be as good as they've been.
Yeah, it has been a little surprising. I mean, they were supposed to be one of the best teams in the National League, if not the best team. And one of the question marks they had coming into the season obviously was the pitching, the injuries to Minaya and Montas, as you referenced, and they've shattered expectations. But coming off a rough weekend against the Rays, they kind of got smacked in the mouth a little bit, and the cracks were on full display, specifically with the pitching staff and the starting rotation. But yeah, I mean, the Mets are still in really, really good shape going into this off day.
Yeah, I would agree with that here. And I want to start with Pete Alonso here. And obviously, saga lingered throughout the offseason. There was a point where we thought he was going to leave. Then they ended up going with this basically band-aid 1 year contract with an extra year on it in case he struggled. He's crushed it this year. He is going to the All-Star game in some form, whether it's a starter or not, remains to be seen. But we think the big differences for Pete Alonso from last year to this year specifically has made him like such a more dynamic player on that offense.
Just think that he's swinging at good pitches and he's doing damage, and he looks like a man on a mission. He looks like a player who's going to exercise his opt out after this year, and he wants to stay with the Mets. They want to keep him, but at the end of the day, it's a business decision. I think he's going to be taken care of. I think they're going to wind up making him a Met for life. And look, I mean, we're in mid-June and he's 10 home runs away from breaking Darryl Strawberry's franchise record in team history with the 252 home runs that Darryl currently has. So Pete's having a big year. I think when all's said and done, he's going to cash in free agency next year, and yeah, he looks like a rejuvenated player this year.
Yeah, it does feel like that last year, he had the window to leave and teams were not as interested in him. I do feel like even looking at the market now, it doesn't really feel like there's like a natural fit. Like, okay, this team needs a first baseman. He's the guy who could fill it. Like, I feel like there's not a lot of teams that could spend as much on him as the Mets would.
Yeah, and like what are the backup options if they let Alonso go? I mean, are they going to move Vientos to first base? Are they going to go short-term deal? Like there's just not too many options, and I think that giving Alonso a long-term deal would be worth it at this point. He's shown the type of player that he is, and really, where would the Mets be? They wouldn't be the best team in the National League without him this year. He's a dynamic player, and they need him in the top of that lineup with Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought Soto up here because obviously it's been a little bit of a soap opera time with some of the stories coming out about Juan Soto. He did not get up to his hottest start as he did as a Yankee last year, but you look at some of the overall numbers, like he's produced almost 3 wins above replacement already. It's fight performing subpar to his standards here. The baseball savant page basically says Juan Soto should be hitting by 40, 50 points higher than he actually is here. Like, what do you make of what we've seen so far from Soto in year one of the Mets?
Well, I think that's a good point. I think he's been unlucky. He's kind of looked uncomfortable at times especially in the beginning and with what we saw in the Subway Series when he had to go back to Yankee Stadium. But he's starting to look more comfortable, and his bat's starting to heat up, and he's putting up more Juan Soto-like numbers. He's got, I think, believe the second highest OPS on the team now. That average is starting to creep up. The home run total starting to creep up. So yeah, I think that Soto is going to be just fine when all's said and done. I mean, his numbers right now are similar to what he put up when he went to San Diego at first, coming off that blockbuster trade 3 years ago. But I think he's going to have a much better year than that, and I think he's going to be okay when all's said and done.
Yeah, I would agree with that here in terms of the Soto situation here. I go to another thing that's made the Mets so successful this year, which is the pitching. Because
Yeah.
in terms of the starting pitching here, I mean, if you told the Met fan going into the year, okay, you have Griffin Canning and Tyler McGill both in rotation. You're not gonna have either of your big free agent guys pitching yet, and you're gonna lead the National League in starting staff ERA over the first 2.5 months of the season. Like, I don't think anyone would believe it. So, what has made the Mets so successful in terms of finding these guys and maximizing what they have out of their pitching when they could have given big money to guys like Corbin Burns or Blake Snell? We saw how well it's worked out for those two contracts.
Well, I think it's two things. I think it's the coaching staff they have and the pitching lab that we keep hearing so much about. And they're clearly doing some special things with guys in there. All the people I've talked to in the past year in the Mets organization are pretty confident that they can get their hands on almost any arm and get the most out of them in their potential and unlock their potential. And we've seen it firsthand with Clay Holmes moving him to a starter, Griffin Canning, even though he struggled in his last six starts, David Peterson, Kodai Senga, like the list goes on and on and on. And even when the Mets pick up guys who, obviously this is on the relief side, but the Justin Garzas of the world, and then they throw them in the fire and they're getting big outs for them. Like, it's very impressive with what the coaching staff's been able to do, particularly Jeremy Hefner, the pitching lab, and the training staff, and keeping most of these guys healthy along the way.
Yeah, I've had some issues on the pitching side right now. Like the Kodai Senga injury is a big blow because he was leading the league in ERA before he gets hurt. And I mean, there was a timetable out there about 5 weeks, it seems right. Because it says a 2 week shutdown, and then
Yeah.
you're going to need a month to build back up here. Do you think the Mets will be able to get Kodai Senga back on the field within a reasonable amount of time? I felt like last year when we had the Senga injury, like there was a lot of like miscommunication between they felt he was doing okay. He said my mechanics are not all right. Like, do you think they've gotten a better feel on how to get Kawhi Senga back on the field quick in an expeditious fashion?
I think they have after what they went through last year, and keep in mind that was a high grade calf strain that he suffered when he came back from the IL. Now this is a low grade one hamstring strain, and 2 weeks, before being reevaluated, but he's not going to be fully shut down. He's going to be able to keep his arm active, which is pretty good news. And yeah, there is a 5 week timeline floating around, but I think that makes sense because by the time he gets reevaluated in 2 weeks, and then they ramp him back up to be ready to pitch in major league games again, I would estimate it to be around 4 to 6 weeks before we see him back on the major league mound. But I do think that it's a lot different. It's not going to be like last year where he was out for a an extended period of time. I think we'll see Kodai Senga again at some point in July.
Yeah, I think my target has always been like I think after the All-Star break, if he's not back, then you can start asking what's going on here.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that that should be the target for getting him back around the All-Star break, maybe a little bit after. And yeah, if it's any point further, then that means that he probably suffered a setback, and then things get a little dicey from there.
Yeah, another interesting situation with the pitching here is that we have Frankie Montas on his way back from like an injury suffering spring training, a lat injury, but the results in the rehab side have been like downright disasters. And I know that like a lot of times that the rehab results don't mean much, but things have gotten bad to the point where we have reports coming out now that they're saying he might end up in the bullpen because they're trying to tweak his mechanics. It's just not taking here. Like, what would the concern level be if you're the Mets about what you're going to get out of Frankie Montas and the investment they made in him?
Well, with people I've talked to and scouts I've talked to, there should be less concern with Montas because he's been averaging about 95 miles per hour on his fastball. Montas said that he feels great, his shoulder feels healthy, his lat feels healthy, and that he's just working through some mechanical things. Now, the results have been a little bit of a worry because he's given up 7 home runs in his last three rehab starts, but with that velocity up there, it should be a little bit less of a concern. And they're talking about maybe putting him in the bullpen, and Monta said he's open to helping the team in any way, so that's a good sign. And I think his velocity would play well in the bullpen. So I think he's going to be okay. Once he comes back, but we'll see. What he does in his final rehab start that's coming up here.
Do you think that he has any shot to earn his way into the rotation? I know that there are Met fans online grumbling about like Griffin Canning has struggled a little bit his last few starts. Tyler McGill is ERA's over 5 his last 6 starts. Like, is there any path Montage has to get back in that rotation? I think he's gonna take it for the pen until he can kind of straighten things out.
Yeah, I think that some of it's going to depend on what he does in his sixth rehab start, and it also is going to depend on what Paul Blackburn does this week because Blackburn looked excellent in his start in LA against the Dodgers, and then he's gotten roughed up in his last two relief outings. So if he's better suited in the rotation and Montas could make an impact in the bullpen, then that might make sense. But I mean, they signed Montas to be a starter, so I think there is a chance for him to kind of right the ship and be back in the rotation, soon enough.
All right, let's go to I think another interesting nugget about the Mets this year. It's something that I think a lot of fans have started to notice here, especially if you've gone to a game and you've seen how full Citi Field is. I mean, prior to this week against the Rays, the Mets were basically unbeatable at home, and they were just dynamic at Citi Field. They fed off the energy of the crowd. The game on Tuesday against Washington in particular, like on a weeknight in the middle of June before school's out, sounded like a playoff atmosphere. Is incredible. So like, why do you think the Mets have done so well at home this year? It's not always been the case of the Mets.
Yeah, it hasn't been the case for them in a number of years, and I don't really know, can't really put my finger on it, but I mean, I guess the home field advantage does play a factor when the crowds have been coming out. I mean, I believe the Mets have risen from 18th to 5th in attendance since last year, so I think that's part of it, that the fans are really into it, and the Mets seem to be feeding off the crowd. So yeah, they've pretty much been unbeatable at home, and with the exception of this past weekend, and yeah, I think that a lot of it's got to do with the crowd and just filling up the stadium night after night.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, they have a lot of work to do with the deadline here coming up because obviously they have bullpen needs. Like center field could be an option depending on who's on the market here. Like, how aggressive do you think they're going to be at the deadline? Like, think they're looking at any besides those two areas I mentioned?
Well, I think they should be aggressive with they have the best record in the NL, and they have a chance to make a deep run in the postseason again this year and maybe get over the hump. So, losing AJ Minter and was a big blow for the bullpen, and Ryan Stanek struggled, and they need some high leverage relief arms, and almost every contender is going to be looking for that. So it's kind of hard, and the prices are going to be higher than maybe they're going to want to pay. But at the same time, they're going to have to be a little aggressive here and replace Minter, maybe get a lefty in there, high leverage arm or two, and yeah, maybe look at center field like a Cedric Mullins or even maybe a Jaron Duran. So yeah, those are options and routes that they can go, and I think they need another bat in the lineup, and I think they need multiple high leverage relief arms and maybe even some more starting depth if the injuries continue to persist here.
Yeah, the starting depth, I think something interesting here is like they have a couple of these kids down at AAA who are close to the majors, but not there yet. Something I've been thinking about in terms of an idea of what they could do to get some of these kids up, especially like you're looking more like a Nolan McLean who has been like so dominant for Syracuse and has been getting close to a call up here. Like, do you think that at some point the Mets could think about, okay, let's bring this kid up and have him work in the bullpen like we've seen teams do in the past as starters, like Tampa did with David Price, he first came up. The Cardinals did with Wainwright against the Mets infamously in '06. So, like, do you think that's an option where maybe some of these young starting pitchers could get converted to relievers? Say, okay, just limit your innings, like get your best stuff here and work middle innings for us in big spots.
I think it's possible. I'll believe it when I see it though, because we talked about this last year with maybe Brandon Sproat doing that, and it just didn't happen. And but you did mention it. Guys like McLean and Sproat are closer now this year. They've had more experience in AAA, so yeah, it's definitely possible. But I think that they're going to add at the trade deadline, and there might not be room for guys like that. But that is definitely a route that they can go if they decide to stick in house and don't get the targets that they're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of my last question here is obviously they are in a critical stretch of their schedule here. They got 10 games in a row with divisional days starting on Tuesday here. They got seven with Atlanta, who's not played well, but they're still Atlanta. They still have a lot of talent. And three in Philadelphia over the weekend here. Like, obviously, they're not going to win the National League East in a week, but like, how important is this stretch of the schedule for them to sort of like solidify their positioning in the standings?
Yeah, it is pretty important of a stretch here and to distance themselves a little bit from the guys behind from the teams behind them in the Phillies and the Braves. And yeah, they have to take advantage. And when they go head to head, it's really going to determine in the long run whether they're going to win the division or not is how they play against the Phillies, how they play against the Braves. And yeah, like you said, it's not the Braves are they've struggled this year, but they're no pushovers. And the Mets are going to have to in this upcoming series, they're going to have to face Schwellenbach, they're going to have to face Chris Sale, Spencer Strider, like that those are not easy tasks facing those elite starting pitchers. So yeah, I think that it's crucial this stretch coming up for the Mets to distance themselves. I believe they only have a 2.5 game lead on the Phillies right now. So yeah, they need to capitalize here in this stretch and yeah, then bounce back after getting swept by the Rays over the weekend.
Yeah, that Philly series over the weekend is the last time they see Philadelphia until late August. So like I know they swept them earlier this year, but like if they could win two out of three, I know it's gonna be tough because they have a bad pitching matchup Friday with McGill against Zach Wheeler. But like if they can find a way to win that series, they'll set themselves up so well for the stretch run.
Yeah, no, absolutely they will. They need to take advantage of this stretch right here.
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow the Mets coverage over on Mets on how can they do that and keep up with you on social media?
Yeah, you could follow me at Ragazzo Report, Ragazzo Report, and follow my work and Mike's work at Mets on SI, si.com/MLB/Mets.